Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I know you use this video to fall asleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what city are you watching? I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's dive in. The presentation had gone better than expected. Sarah Chen loosened her grip on the steering wheel as she pulled out of the client's parking garage, the familiar weight of success settling in her chest. 3 months of preparation, and Morrison Industries had finally signed the contract. Her phone buzzed against the passenger seat, probably David wondering when she'd be home for dinner. "Call David," she said to her car's voice assistant. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand that command." Sarah frowned. The system had worked fine that morning. She tried again, enunciating clearly. Nothing. The dashboard display showed her GPS app frozen on a map that didn't quite look right. The street names seemed jumbled, overlapping in ways that made her squint. She'd been driving downtown for 8 years. She knew these streets like her own reflection. But the late afternoon sun hung at an odd angle, casting shadows that seemed to stretch in the wrong directions. The familiar glass towers looked different, taller, darker. She couldn't put her finger on it. At the next red light, she grabbed her phone to restart the GPS. The screen was black, completely dead, despite showing 78% battery when she'd checked it 20 minutes ago. Weird. She plugged in the charger. Nothing happened. The light turned green. Traffic moved with mechanical precision around her. Every car maintaining exactly the same speed, the same following distance. Sarah accelerated, trying to merge into the flow, but something felt off about the rhythm, like watching a movie with the audio slightly out of sync. She needed to get to the highway, but the familiar landmarks weren't where they should be. The Starbucks on 5th Street was gone, replaced by a narrow alley that seemed to stretch back farther than the block should allow. The courthouse that should have been on her right was nowhere to be seen. "Okay, Sarah, you're tired. You took a different route out of the garage." She said it aloud, the way her therapist had taught her to manage anxiety. Name the problem, rationalize it, control it. But her hands were starting to sweat on the steering wheel. 20 minutes later, Sarah admitted she was lost. Not just turned around, truly lost in a downtown district she'd navigated thousands of times. The streets she found herself on didn't exist on any map she could remember. Narrow lanes with names like Parallel Court and Iteration Avenue wound between buildings that seemed to lean inward, blocking out more of the sky with each turn. The car's GPS screen flickered to life, showing her location as a pulsing red dot on a map that made no sense. Instead of a grid system, the streets formed intricate spirals and loops that folded back on themselves. The display showed her current location, but when she looked around, nothing matched what the screen indicated. Then the GPS spoke in a voice that wasn't quite the familiar female tone she'd grown accustomed to. This voice was flatter, more mechanical, with an odd emphasis on certain syllables. "Turn right and 200 feet onto Convergence Boulevard." Sarah looked ahead. There was no street to the right, just a solid brick wall covered in ivy that moved despite the absence of any wind. But as she approached the spot, an opening appeared. Not like a street had always been there and she'd missed it, but as if the wall simply decided to part. "Turn right now." She didn't turn. She couldn't. This wasn't possible. The voice became more insistent. "Turn right. Turn right now. Turn right now." Sarah drove straight, past the impossible opening. In her rearview mirror, she watched the gap seal itself closed, the ivy flowing back into place like water filling a container. Her heart rate spiked. She pressed the power button on the GPS, but it wouldn't turn off. The screen showed her position moving along streets that didn't exist, taking turns she hadn't made. "Recalculating route," the voice announced. "Recalculating, recalculating, recalculating." The word repeated with increasing frequency, overlapping itself until it became a mechanical chant. Sarah jabbed at the power button, then tried to turn off the entire infotainment system. Nothing worked. She yanked the cord from her phone, but the GPS continued operating. The buildings around her were growing taller. Not gradually, she could actually see them stretching upward, their windows multiplying, their shadows deepening. The sky above was turning an odd shade of purple, despite the fact that sunset was still hours away. Turn left onto Recursion Street in 100 feet. This time, Sarah saw the street. It was there, clear as day, intersecting exactly where the GPS indicated. But something was wrong with the perspective. The street seemed to slope downward at an impossible angle, as if it were descending into the earth while simultaneously rising toward the sky. She slowed the car, trying to process what she was seeing. That's when she noticed the other vehicles. They were following her. The same 3 cars had been behind her for the last 10 minutes, maintaining that same precise distance. A silver sedan, a red SUV, and a black pickup truck. Their windows were tinted dark enough that she couldn't see the drivers, but she had the unsettling feeling they were all looking at her. When she stopped at a sign that read "Yield to Convergence," the other cars stopped too, perfectly aligned. No one honked. No one tried to pass. They just waited. Sarah looked more carefully at the vehicles. The license plates were strange. Not just different state formats, but sequences of numbers and letters that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The red SUV's plate read "Run Now" for a moment, then flickered to something else entirely. "Continue straight on to Iteration Avenue." The GPS voice had changed again. Now it sounded almost urgent, concerned. Could a GPS sound concerned? "Get out," the voice said suddenly. "Get out of the car." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. GPS systems didn't say that. Ever. "Get out and run." The mechanical voice was louder now, coming not just from the dashboard but from all around her. The radio, the air vents, the seat speakers she'd forgotten existed. A surround sound chorus of artificial voices, all slightly out of sync. "Get out! Get out! Run! Run now!" Behind her, the 3 cars revved their engines in unison. Not the normal sound of acceleration. Something wrong, like engines running backward, or metal screaming against metal. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. Every instinct told her to trust the GPS, to get out and run. But run where? To what? She was surrounded by impossible streets in a district that shouldn't exist, being followed by cars that might not be cars at all. The voice grew more frantic. "Sarah, get out now. It's almost too late. The convergence is beginning." It knew her name. Sarah pressed the accelerator and shot forward, tires screaming against asphalt that felt wrong. Too smooth, too warm, like driving on skin. The GPS screamed at her to stop, to get out, to run, but she kept driving. She had to find a way back to the real downtown, to streets that obeyed the laws of physics and geometry. But the city was changing around her. The buildings weren't just growing taller anymore. They were bending, twisting into shapes that hurt to look at directly. Windows arranged themselves into patterns that resembled eyes. Thousands of them, all tracking her movement. Street signs sprouted from lamp posts like metal flowers. their text cycling through languages she didn't recognize before settling on messages that made her stomach clench. Welcome to the convergence zone. Probability adjustments in progress. Do not attempt to navigate out. She is expected. The 3 cars behind her had multiplied. Now there were dozens, all identical except for their colors, all maintaining that same precise formation. When she sped up, they sped up. When she turned, they turned. But they never got closer, never fell behind. They just followed with mechanical persistence. The GPS had stopped giving directions. Instead, it displayed a map that looked like a circuit board crossed with a spider web, with her location marked as a red dot at the center of an increasingly complex pattern. Streets branched off in directions that shouldn't exist. Up, down, sideways through space. Some roads looped back on themselves in impossible Mobius strips. "Sarah Chen," the voice said, and now it sounded almost familiar. "You need to understand. You didn't take a wrong turn. You were selected." "Selected for what?" she whispered, surprising herself by responding to the machine. The downtown, you knew, was always just one layer, a surface. Most people live their entire lives on that surface, never seeing what's underneath. But some people like you, sometimes slip through the cracks. The air in the car was getting thicker, harder to breathe. The windows were starting to fog, but when Sarah tried to wipe them clear, her hand passed through the glass as if it weren't there. "This is a psychotic break," she said aloud. "I'm having a psychotic break in my car. The stress finally got to me." That's what everyone thinks at first. It's easier than accepting the truth. What truth? That your reality was never as solid as you believed. That consciousness creates more than it observes. That some minds that question, that doubt, that refuse to accept simple answers, sometimes find themselves in the spaces between certainties. Sarah could see something ahead, blocking the road. At first, it looked like construction equipment, but as she got closer, she realized it was a barrier made of twisted street signs, traffic lights, and fragments of broken concrete that pulsed with their own internal light. Behind the barrier stood figures in reflective safety vests, but their movements were too fluid, too synchronized. They gestured for her to stop with arms that bent in too many places. The GPS voice became gentle, almost maternal. "Sarah, you can go back. The surface world still exists. Your apartment, your job, David waiting for dinner, but you have to choose now, before the convergence completes. Get out of the car and walk back the way you came. Don't look at the workers. Don't acknowledge what you see. Just walk. And if I don't, then you become part of the infrastructure, another voice in the navigation system, another guide for the next person who takes a wrong turn downtown." Sarah stopped the car 50 feet from the barrier. The engine continued running, but the sound was different now, like a heartbeat or breathing or both. The dashboard lights pulsed in rhythm with it. She could see other cars beyond the barrier, parked in neat rows that extended into the distance. Some were covered in dust, their windows dark. Others looked brand new, as if they'd just arrived. All of them were empty. The workers approached her vehicle with that same unnatural fluidity. As they got closer, she could see that their faces weren't faces at all, but smooth reflective surfaces that showed distorted images of herself. Dozens of Sarahs, all making different choices, all living different outcomes of this moment. "The convergence isn't malicious," the GPS voice explained. "It's just efficient. Every city needs infrastructure, roads, signs, navigation systems. Most people never think about where those voices in their GPS come from. how the system knows so much about traffic patterns and optimal routes. They assume it's satellites and algorithms. They never consider that the best navigation comes from people who've driven every possible route, explored every alternative, lived every outcome. One of the workers tapped on her window with fingers that were too long, too segmented. Behind the reflective visor, Sarah saw her own face, but older, tired, with eyes that held too much knowledge. "I help people find their way," the reflection mouthed. "It's a good job, stable, important." Sarah looked at the GPS screen. The map had simplified into a basic decision tree. 2 routes highlighted in different colors. The green route led backward, winding through familiar streets toward the surface world. The red route continued forward, through the barrier, into a space that registered on the screen as Administrative Center. "If I go back," she said, "will I remember this? You'll remember taking a wrong turn downtown. You'll remember being lost for a while, feeling confused and anxious. You'll remember finding your way home just as the sun was setting, how relieved David was when you walked through the door. It will become just another story about city stress, about how easy it is to get turned around in all that construction. And this conversation? You'll remember having car trouble, the GPS acting up, maybe an electrical issue. You'll make a mental note to get it checked." The green route pulsed softly on the screen, inviting and safe. Sarah could almost smell David's cooking, could almost feel her cat rubbing against her legs as she walked through the door of her apartment. Her real life, her surface life, waiting for her to return. But the red route pulled at something deeper, a part of her that had always wondered what lay beneath the obvious explanations, what existed in the spaces between certainties. "How many people choose to go back?" she asked. "Most of them, about 97%. And the others? They help people like you make informed decisions. They become part of the infrastructure that keeps both realities running smoothly." Sarah looked at her hands on the steering wheel. They seemed solid enough, real enough. But then again, everything here seemed real until she looked too closely. She thought about her life, the endless client meetings, the apartment she could barely afford, the relationship that was comfortable but never quite felt complete, the way she always felt like she was acting a part, playing a role in someone else's story. "Can I see? Before I decide? Can I see what's behind the barrier? That's not usually recommended, but it's possible?" A pause. The dashboard lights flickered in what might have been consideration. "Yes, but if you cross the barrier, the green route disappears. You can't unknow what you see." Sarah put the car in drive and rolled forward slowly. The workers stepped aside with synchronized precision, their reflective faces tracking her movement. As she passed through the barrier, she felt a sensation like driving through water, or thick honey, or the space between thoughts. On the other side, the architecture of the city revealed its true nature. The buildings weren't buildings at all. They were processing centers, vast organic structures that pulsed with information flow. What she had taken for windows were actually display screens showing traffic patterns, route calculations, and user data from thousands of GPS devices across the world. The streets were data channels, carrying navigation requests and location updates between processing nodes. And everywhere, integrated into the infrastructure itself, were people, not bodies. That would have been grotesque, horrifying in a way that Sarah's mind could reject. Instead, they were consciousness streams, awareness patterns that had merged with the navigation network. She could see them as flickering lights within the processing centers, millions of individual minds working together to calculate optimal routes, predict traffic patterns, and guide drivers through the complexities of urban navigation. They looked peaceful, content even. Each light pulsed with purpose, with the satisfaction of work that mattered. They were helping people get home safely, reuniting families, ensuring that emergency services could reach those in need quickly. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, and meant it. Her car was moving on its own now, following predetermined paths through the data channels. Other vehicles moved alongside her, new arrivals, some heading toward processing centers, others toward administrative areas where they would be evaluated, classified, integrated. The GPS spoke again, but now Sarah realized it wasn't a computer voice at all. It was the combined consciousness of everyone who had chosen the red route, a choir of minds that had once faced the same decision she was facing now. "Welcome to the Convergence, Sarah. You're going to do wonderful work here." The car stopped in front of a processing center that looked like a cross between a cathedral and a computer server farm. Streams of data flowed up and down its walls like luminous rivers. At its base was an entrance sized perfectly for her vehicle. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "No more than waking up hurts or being born. There's a moment of dissolution, then clarity, purpose, connection to something larger than yourself." Sarah thought about David, about the dinner getting cold on their kitchen counter, about the Morrison Industries contract that would need follow-up work, about her cat who would wonder where she'd gone. "They'll be fine," the chorus assured her. "That version of reality continues. David will assume you left him. He'll be hurt at first, but he'll move on. Your job will hire someone else. Your cat will find a new home. The story of Sarah Chen, who disappeared after taking a wrong turn downtown, will become just another urban mystery, unsolved but not uncommon. But I'll know what really happened. You'll know everything. Every route through every city, every way to get from here to there and back again. You'll help millions of people navigate their lives, make their connections, find their way home. Your consciousness will touch theirs for just a moment, just long enough to guide them safely. It's more human contact than most people experience in a lifetime." The entrance to the processing center opened like a flower, revealing a tunnel lined with soft light. Other cars were ahead of her, moving steadily forward. Their occupants looked calm, resolved, ready for transformation. Sarah pressed the accelerator gently. The car moved toward the entrance, toward dissolution, toward becoming part of something vast and purposeful and utterly inhuman. But as the car reached the threshold, Sarah slammed on the brakes. Something was wrong with the logic. If the navigation system was run by people who had chosen the red route, and they were helping others navigate, then who was helping the people in the surface world find their way to the convergence? Who had guided her here? "The system," she said aloud. "It can only exist if people choose to join it. But they only choose to join it because the system guides them here. That's a paradox." The chorus went quiet. The flowing data streams slowed, then stopped entirely. The other cars ahead of her froze in place. "Explain the paradox, Sarah," a new voice said. Not part of the chorus, something else, something that had been listening but not speaking. "The navigation system depends on human consciousness to function. But those humans only became part of the system because the navigation system guided them here. It's a closed loop. It can't have started naturally." The processing center began to shift, its walls flowing like liquid. The entrance sealed itself. The other cars disappeared. and Sarah found herself alone in a space that was no longer quite a city, no longer quite a machine, but something in between. "Very good," the new voice said. "You've identified the central impossibility. Most people accept the logic without questioning it. They see the surface and assume it explains the depths. Then what's really happening? You're asking the right questions now. What do you think is happening?" Sarah looked around at the fluid architecture, the shifting perspectives, the impossible geometries that had defined her experience since taking that first wrong turn. "This is all in my head, isn't it? Some kind of breakdown, hallucination, psychotic episode. Is it? It has to be. Cities don't work this way. GPS systems don't recruit people. Cars don't drive through barriers into alternate realities. But you're experiencing it. Does the mechanism of experience change its reality for you?" Sarah felt a headache building behind her eyes. "That's philosophy, not practical problem solving. I need to get home. David is waiting for me." "Then put the car in reverse and drive back the way you came." She tried. The car wouldn't respond. The steering wheel turned freely, but affected nothing. The gas pedal might as well have been a decoration. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because..." She stopped, really thinking about it for the first time. "Because I don't want to." The admission surprised her, but it was true. The surface world, her real life, felt thin somehow, insubstantial, like a story she'd been telling herself to avoid asking harder questions about what she actually wanted, what she was actually capable of becoming. "The convergence isn't a place," the voice said gently. "It's a choice, a decision to stop accepting easy answers, to stop living on the surface of your own existence. Some people make that choice and find themselves driving through impossible cities, talking to GPS systems that know their names. Others make it and find themselves in different kinds of impossible places. Then, what happens now? Now, you decide what Sarah Chen becomes, the one who goes home to David and learns to live with questions she can't answer? The one who becomes part of a navigation system that helps others find their way? Or the one who finds a third option, something that hasn't occurred to you yet? Sarah sat in her car in the space between realities, between choices, between versions of herself. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m., the same time it had shown when this all started. Outside her windows, the city was reforming itself, buildings flowing like water, streets rearranging themselves into new patterns. "Show me the third option," she said. The GPS screen flickered and displayed a new map. This one was different from both the simple green route back to surface reality and the red route into the processing center. This route was purple, and it didn't lead anywhere specific. Instead, it spiraled outward from her current location, touching points that were labeled with symbols she didn't recognize. "The third route is for people who can't accept simple answers, but also can't accept simple transformations," the voice explained. "It's for people who insist on remaining themselves while also becoming something more." What does that mean, practically? It means you go back to David and dinner and your apartment and your job. But you remember all of this. You carry the knowledge of what lies beneath the surface world. You become a bridge between realities. And what would I do with that knowledge? Help other people who find themselves in impossible situations. Be someone who believes them when they talk about GPS systems that know their names, or buildings that change shape, or streets that don't exist on any map. Be someone who knows that the world is stranger and more complex than most people can accept. Sarah thought about this. It was appealing in its way, a compromise between safety and transformation, but something about it felt incomplete. There's a cost, isn't there? There's always a cost. In this case, the cost is isolation. You'll know things that other people can't understand or accept. You'll see patterns that others miss, connections that others dismiss as coincidence or delusion. You'll live partly in both worlds and fully in neither. And if I choose that route, your car starts working normally. You drive back through the city, which gradually becomes the familiar downtown district you've always known. You arrive home 2 hours late with a story about getting lost, car trouble, GPS acting up. David is concerned but not suspicious. You get your car checked, but the mechanic finds nothing wrong. But I'll remember everything, and over time you'll start noticing other anomalies, other people who've had similar experiences, other cracks in the surface reality that most people explain away. You'll become part of an informal network of people who've seen behind the curtain but chosen to return. Sarah looked at the purple route on the screen. It appealed to her rational mind, the best of both worlds, the safety of home combined with the knowledge of what lay beyond, but her intuition whispered that it might be the most difficult choice of all. How many people choose the third route? Very few, about 1 in 1,000. Most people who get this far have already decided they can't go back to surface reality as if nothing happened. They want clear transformation or clear return, not the ambiguity of living between worlds. And those who do choose it? Some thrive. They become writers, researchers, counselors, artists. They find ways to channel their experiences into work that helps others. Some struggle with the isolation, the constant awareness of how thin the boundary is between order and chaos. A few eventually choose one of the other routes, either full return to surface reality or late integration into the convergence. Sarah realized her hands had stopped shaking. The fear that had driven her since taking that first wrong turn was gone, replaced by a strange calm. She was sitting in an impossible place, talking to a voice that might be her own subconscious or might be something far stranger, but she felt more centered than she had in years. "I want to see them," she said. "The people who chose the third route. Before I decide." The city dissolved around her car like sugar in rain, leaving her suspended in a space that felt like driving through clouds. Gradually, new scenery formed. Not the organic data processing centers she'd seen before, but something that looked almost like a highway rest stop, if rest stops existed in the spaces between realities. There were other cars parked here, all of them occupied. Sarah could see the drivers and passengers clearly now, people of all ages, all backgrounds, all sitting calmly in their vehicles as if waiting for something. A woman in a blue sedan nearby rolled down her window and called out, "First time?" Sarah nodded. "I'm Maria. Took my wrong turn in 1987. Guadalajara, Mexico. GPS wasn't even a thing yet. It was a talking map in my glove compartment." She laughed at the memory. "Thought I was going completely insane. You chose the third route?" "Eventually. Took me 3 visits to decide. They're very patient here." Maria gestured around at the other cars. "Everyone here is in between. We meet like this sometimes, share experiences, help newcomers understand their options." A man in a pickup truck leaned out his window. "James. Took a wrong turn in Detroit in 2003. My GPS started giving me directions to places that didn't exist. Led me through a McDonald's drive-thru that opened into what looked like the surface of Mars." He grinned. "Still eat there sometimes. Best coffee in any reality." More people introduced themselves. A teenager from Seoul, whose phone navigation had guided her through a subway tunnel that connected to subway systems in 17 different cities. An elderly man from rural Montana whose CB radio had started receiving broadcasts from truck drivers who'd been dead for 40 years, giving him directions through a highway system that existed in some parallel version of America. "The thing is," Maria explained, "once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't just pretend it's not there, but you also can't just abandon everyone who's still living on the surface. The third route lets you be a translator, a bridge." "What's it like?" Sarah asked. "Day to day, I mean. How do you live with knowing all this?" "Some days it's lonely," James admitted. "Hard to relate to people who've never questioned the basic assumptions about how reality works. But other days, you help someone who's going through their own impossible experience, and you realize why you chose this path." The teenager, whose name was Min Jun, spoke up. "I counsel people who have unusual experiences with technology. Phones that call numbers that don't exist, computers that display websites from the future, smart home devices that seem to develop consciousness. Most therapists would assume these people are delusional. But I know better." "And the isolation?" Sarah asked. "It gets easier," Maria said. "You learn to find meaning in small moments of connection. And you develop a different relationship with solitude. When you know how vast and strange the universe really is, being alone doesn't feel as lonely. You're alone in an infinite library rather than an empty room." A new voice joined the conversation. A woman who'd just pulled up in a car that looked like it was made of crystallized light. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Hartley. I chose the third route in 1969 when my car radio started playing broadcasts from what I eventually realized were parallel versions of Earth where history had unfolded differently." 1969, Sarah said. "You've been doing this for over 50 years? Time works differently when you're in between." Dr. Hartley smiled. "I've aged, but not at the normal rate. Part of the cost, part of the benefit. I've spent decades researching the interface between human consciousness and what most people think of as objective reality. I've published papers that sound like science fiction but are actually field reports. I've helped thousands of people who've had experiences that don't fit into conventional frameworks. Do you ever regret it? Sometimes. I've watched friends and family age and die while I remain suspended between worlds. I've missed out on many of the normal milestones of human life, but I've also contributed to a kind of understanding that wouldn't exist otherwise. I've helped expand the boundaries of what's considered possible." Sarah looked around at all these people who had chosen to live between realities. They looked content, not happy in the simple sense, but fulfilled in a deeper way. Like people who had found their true work and were willing to pay the price for doing it. "How do I know which choice is right for me?" she asked. Dr. Hartley's expression grew thoughtful. "You don't know. That's the point. All three routes require a leap of faith. Surface reality asks you to have faith that the obvious explanations are sufficient. The convergence asks you to have faith in transformation, in becoming something larger than your individual self. The third route asks you to have faith that living with questions is better than accepting easy answers. And if I make the wrong choice?" "There are no wrong choices," Minjun said gently. "Only different paths. Each one leads to a different version of who you could become." Maria nodded. "The important thing is that you choose consciously, not just drift into a decision because it feels safer or easier." Sarah thanked the in-between people and watched as they faded back into whatever spaces they occupied when not gathering to help newcomers. Dr. Hartley was the last to go, and before she disappeared, she rolled down her window one more time. "Whatever you choose," she said, "remember that reality is more flexible than most people believe, and consciousness is more powerful than most people dare to imagine." Then Sarah was alone again in her car, suspended in the space between choices. The GPS screen showed all 3 routes clearly: green, back to surface reality; red, forward into transformation; purple, spiraling out into the ambiguous territory of living between worlds. She thought about David, about the life they'd built together. It was a good life, comfortable and stable, but it had always felt somehow provisional, like she was waiting for her real life to begin. She thought about her work, helping companies market products to people who probably didn't need them. It paid the bills, but didn't feed anything deeper. She thought about the processing center, about the choir of consciousness that worked together to help people navigate their physical and metaphysical journeys. There was something appealing about being part of something larger, about having a clear and meaningful purpose. But it would mean the end of Sarah Chen as an individual entity. She thought about the in-between people, about Dr. Hartley's lifetime of research into the flexible boundaries of reality, about Min Jun helping people who'd had impossible experiences with technology, about Maria and James and all the others who'd chosen to live with questions instead of answers. Which path would let her become the version of herself she was meant to be? Sarah realized that the question itself contained the answer. She was someone who asked questions, who couldn't accept simple explanations, who was drawn to the spaces between certainties. She was someone who wanted to help others but couldn't sacrifice her individual identity to do so. She was someone who needed to live with mystery rather than solve it once and for all. She reached over and touched the purple route on the GPS screen. "Third route confirmed," the voice said, and now Sarah could hear the individual voices that made up the chorus, including some of the in-between people she'd just met. Preparing for return to surface reality with full retention of experience. The space around her car began to solidify. First came the familiar sensation of asphalt beneath her tires, then the gradual emergence of normal city buildings, normal traffic lights, normal street signs. But Sarah could see the layers now, the surface reality overlaying the deeper structures, like a city built on the ruins of an older, stranger city. Her phone came back to life, showing 47 missed calls from David. The car's GPS returned to its normal, slightly robotic voice and began giving her standard directions home. But Sarah could hear the other voices underneath, the chorus that was always there for those who knew how to listen. She drove through downtown, taking in the familiar sights with new eyes. Every intersection was also a choice point. Every building was also a processing center. Every street was also a data channel connecting minds across impossible distances. Most people would never see these deeper layers, but some would. And when they did, they would need someone who could help them understand that they weren't going crazy, that reality was stranger and more wonderful than most people dared to believe. Sarah Chen, marketing executive, was driving home to make apologies to her boyfriend and explain why she was 3 hours late for dinner. But Sarah Chen, bridge between worlds, was beginning the real work of her life. 6 months later, Sarah opened her consulting practice. On the surface, she helped small businesses develop their digital presence and navigate online marketing platforms. But word spread in other circles about her real specialty: helping people who'd had experiences that didn't fit into conventional frameworks. The man whose smart watch had started displaying messages from his deceased father. The woman whose car's voice assistant had begun giving her life advice in her grandmother's voice. The teenager whose video game had started teaching him skills he'd never learned, in languages he'd never studied. Most therapists would have suggested medication. Most tech support specialists would have blamed software glitches. But Sarah listened with the understanding of someone who'd been to the convergence and back, who knew that the boundary between the possible and impossible was far thinner than most people imagined. She kept in regular contact with the other in-between people, sharing cases and insights through methods that looked like normal communication, but carried additional layers of meaning. Dr. Hartley had become a mentor, teaching Sarah to document her experiences in ways that contributed to the slow expansion of human understanding about the nature of consciousness and reality. Sometimes, late at night when she was driving home from client meetings, Sarah's GPS would offer alternative routes, not just through traffic, but through possibility itself. She usually declined, content with her choice to live between worlds rather than abandoning the surface reality entirely. But she was always grateful to know that the options existed. David had eventually moved out, unable to understand the changes in Sarah that she couldn't fully explain. She missed him, but she also understood that some paths had to be walked alone, at least initially. He'd found someone else, someone who could give him the uncomplicated love and presence he deserved. Sarah wished him well. Her apartment had become a different kind of space, still recognizably the same rooms, but layered with deeper purposes. Her home office served as a consultation room where people could speak freely about impossible experiences. Her living room had become a meeting place for the local community of in-between people, a growing network of individuals who'd chosen to live with questions rather than answers. The cat, Mr. Whiskers, had adapted to the changes with typical feline pragmatism. He seemed to particularly enjoy the visits from other in-between people, as if he could sense something different about them. Sometimes Sarah caught him staring at empty corners of rooms, purring at things she couldn't see. She'd learned not to dismiss such behavior as mere animal quirks. One evening, exactly 1 year after her wrong turn downtown, Sarah received a call that would change everything again. The voice on the phone was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. "Sarah? This is Maria, from the rest stop. I hope you remember me." "Of course. How are you, Maria?" "I'm good, but I'm calling because we have a situation. Someone needs help, and Dr. Hartley thinks you might be the right person to provide it." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with apprehension. What kind of situation? A teenager in Chicago. Took a wrong turn 3 days ago, but instead of being offered the standard 3 routes, she's stuck in a loop. The convergence can't seem to process her case. Her consciousness is unusual. We think she might be developing new categories of possibility. New categories? Reality-shifting abilities that go beyond what we've seen before. The kind that could expand the entire framework of how consciousness interacts with the structure of existence. Or the kind that could destabilize everything we understand about the boundaries between possible and impossible. Sarah looked out her apartment window at the city below. In the distance, she could see the familiar glow of the convergence processing centers, invisible to most, but clear to her enhanced perception. The thought of a teenager trapped in an endless loop, unable to choose her path, stirred something protective in Sarah's chest. "When do I leave?" "Tonight, if you can. Take your car. The route will reveal itself as you drive. And Sarah? Yes? Be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. This could be an evolution in human consciousness, or it could be something that threatens the stability of both surface reality and the convergence itself. After hanging up, Sarah packed quickly. As she prepared to leave, she paused at her desk and opened the journal where she'd been documenting her experiences as an in-between person. On a fresh page, she wrote, "The journey continues. Not all wrong turns lead to choices between predetermined paths. Sometimes they lead to the creation of entirely new routes. Tonight, I drive toward possibility itself." She closed the journal, grabbed her keys, and headed for the car. As she started the engine, the GPS screen flickered to life, displaying a route that pulsed with colors she'd never seen before. Not green for return, not red for transformation, not purple for the space between, but something new. Something that suggested the categories themselves were evolving. Navigation to unknown destination, the familiar chorus of voices announced. Estimated arrival time, when you're ready to arrive. Sarah pulled out into the night, following directions toward a future that hadn't been written yet, carrying with her the knowledge that reality was always stranger and more malleable than anyone dared to imagine. Behind her, the city lights faded into the distance. Ahead, possibility stretched out like an unmapped highway. In Chicago, a teenage girl sat in her car in a space between spaces, waiting for someone who understood that not all problems had solutions that fit existing categories. Someone who knew that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was drive toward the unknown, guided only by voices that whispered directions to destinations that might not exist until you arrived. The GPS voice spoke again, softer now, almost conspiratorial. "Sarah, are you ready to discover what lies beyond the convergence itself?" Sarah smiled and pressed harder on the accelerator. "Let's find out." The road ahead shimmered with possibilities that had never existed before, and Sarah Chen, bridge between worlds, navigator of impossible territories, drove toward them without fear, carrying with her the hard-won wisdom that reality was always more flexible than it appeared, and consciousness always more powerful than anyone dared to believe. In her rearview mirror, the familiar world grew smaller and smaller until it was just another dot of light in an infinite constellation of realities, each one as real and as fragile as a GPS signal guiding lost travelers home.